Every hero has a rank, every villain has a name. But what happens when a king falls out of the sky? No quirk, no license, no allegiance, only a crown he refuses to remove, and a will that has never, not once, bent to another man's law. This is What If Dr. Doom was in My Hero Academia, written by me, suggested by Madeline Batea, who asked the question none of us saw coming. So drop your own crossover below right now. Any world, any hero, any villain, because that's step one. Then hit that like button, hype this video up, and subscribe, because every one of those moves your suggestion further up the line and gets the next impossible collision made that much faster. Now, let the sky answer for what it's about to hold.
Ren Kobayashi was 14, and he was not supposed to be out this late. He knew that. His mother had said so twice at dinner, and his father had said it a third time on his way out the door to the night shift, and Ren had nodded both times and gone out anyway, because the vending machine outside Takeda's Konbini had the good melon soda, the imported kind, and it was a 9-minute walk from his apartment, and he was 14, not 6. He could handle 9 minutes. He did not expect the sky to open. There was no siren, no news alert buzzing his phone, no hero patrol car screaming past with its lights strobing red and gold. There was only the ordinary hush of a Musutafu side street at 11 at night. A vending machine's hum, a stray cat picking through a fishbone bag near the drainage grate, the wet smell of last week's rain still caught in the gutters, and then, without any of the sound that should have come first, the air above the intersection folded. That was the only word Ren's mind gave him for it, later, when the heroes asked. Folded, like paper creased down the middle by a hand he couldn't see, a long vertical seam of white-green light tearing itself open 6 meters above the crosswalk, humming at a pitch that made his molars ache before he even registered it as sound. The seam widened, it breathed, somehow, pulsed once, twice, like something alive deciding whether to commit to being born. Then it spat out a man in green and iron, and slammed shut behind him with a thunderclap that shattered every window on the block. Ren was thrown backward into a mailbox. He would have a bruise blooming purple-black across his shoulder blade by morning, and no memory of screaming, though the woman across the street would later tell an Asahi News reporter that the boy had screamed the whole time she watched him. What Ren remembered, what he would remember for the rest of his life, replay in dreams until he was an old man, was the way the figure landed, not stumbled, not crashed, though the concrete cratered a full meter beneath his boots, and cracked outward in a spider web that ate through 3 parking spaces. He landed the way a king steps down from a throne he built himself, cloak snapping once in air that had no wind to move it, one knee bent, one gauntleted fist pressed to the broken street, and then, unhurried, he rose to his full height and simply stood there, in the wreckage of a crosswalk in a city he had never heard of, in a world that did not exist an hour ago as far as he was concerned, and he did not look afraid. He looked furious, faithless, the figure said, to no one, in a voice that came out metallic and resonant, even through a mask that covered his entire face. The rift held. The calculations were exact. This is not. He stopped, turned, slowly, cloak dragging through broken glass, taking in the Konbini sign glowing pink and yellow above a scorched awning, the crumpled bicycle 3 feet from his boots, the boy pressed flat against a mailbox 20 meters back, with a can of unopened melon soda still death-gripped in one fist. This is not Latveria. Ren did not know the word Latveria. He would learn it, along with several hundred other things, over the following months, in the careful debrief sessions that hero agencies ran with civilian witnesses, in the newsreels that would not stop playing this exact 11 seconds of grainy phone footage for the rest of the year. But right now, at 11:14 at night, all he knew was that a man made of green iron, and something colder than iron, had fallen out of a hole in the sky, and that the man was looking directly at him now, head tilted with an attention that felt less like a person noticing a boy, and more like an engineer noticing a variable his equations hadn't accounted for. "You," the figure said, "speak. Where has doom been cast?" Ren opened his mouth. Nothing came out, but a small, humiliating sound, halfway between a word and a whimper. The figure, Doom, he had named himself, though Ren wouldn't understand yet that this was not a title he was claiming but simply his name, offered the way another man might say, "I am John," made a sound of disgust low in his throat, and turned from the boy entirely, dismissing him as a source of information the way one might dismiss a broken instrument. His gauntlets were already moving, fingers dancing over a small embedded panel at his wrist that lit up with unfamiliar green symbols, and the hum that came from it was a sound Ren's world had a name for, though Ren didn't know it yet either. Technology, but wrong, foreign, layered with something underneath that felt less like circuitry and more like a held breath. That was when the first hero arrived. She came in low and fast off the rooftops, a streak of navy and silver costume, and a gust of displaced air that Ren felt against his wet cheeks before he registered the shape of her. Wash, mid-tier pro out of the Musutafu third agency. Quirk, that let her generate and ride pressurized air currents. Competent, fast response. Exactly the kind of hero whose job was to be first on scene for precisely this sort of anomaly, and exactly the kind of hero who had absolutely no protocol on file for this. "Identify yourself," she called down, hovering 8 meters up on a cushion of compressed air, both hands out in the ready stance her agency drilled into every patrol unit. "This area's cordoned as of the first structural alert. I need you to stand down and—" Doom did not look up right away. He finished whatever calculation his gauntlet had been running, the green light in the panel guttering out, and only then did he lift his masked face toward her, and something in the stillness of that motion made Wash's ready stance falter for just a half second, an instinct she wouldn't be able to name later, except to say that he moved like the ground should have been apologizing to him for existing. "You are not Latverian military," Doom said. It was not a question. Nor SHIELD, nor any faction Doom recognizes. "Explain yourself, or explain nothing, and be removed as an obstacle." "I don't know what any of those words mean," Wash said, and to her credit her voice didn't shake. "But what I do know is you just tore a hole in the sky over a residential block, and there's a kid on the ground 20 meters from you, so you're going to stand down, or I'm bringing in backup, and we do this the hard way." "Doom does not stand down." He said it simply, the way another man might state the sky was blue, an observation so foundational it required no defense. Doom has, on occasion, permitted lesser men to believe they had achieved his cooperation. This is not such an occasion. I require passage back to my own reality, and I require it without further theatrics from costumed children playing at authority. Wash's jaw tightened. In her earpiece, dispatch was already screaming for a rank 3 or higher response. Structural damage code orange. Unknown quirk signature. Unknown quirk signature. The words that would matter more than anyone in that first hour understood. And civilian evac, in a 4-block radius. She didn't wait for the escalation. She dropped, cutting the air current beneath her into a spearing downward blast meant to slam him flat against the cratered street and pin him there until real backup arrived. It should have worked. It had worked, in her career, against villains considerably more dangerous on paper than a man in green armor with no quirk registration at all. Doom raised one hand, almost lazily, and the air simply stopped, not deflected, not absorbed in the visible, showy way a barrier quirk might flare gold or blue to announce itself. It simply ceased to be a weapon 3 feet from his palm, the pressure dispersing sideways into the street, in a ring that cracked more concrete, and sent Wash tumbling backward through the air. Control lost, 20 feet, of humiliating uncontrolled spin, before she caught herself against a lamppost hard enough to feel it in her teeth tomorrow. "A parlor trick," Doom said, already turning from her too, dismissing a second combatant as swiftly as he had dismissed the first. "Doom has broken the will of gods, older than your civilization's oldest myth. You bring me wind." He was already moving toward the wreck of his own arrival, cloak dragging, gauntlet relighting with that pale green hum, already 3 steps into rebuilding the calculation that had failed him, when the second hero arrived, and this one did not announce herself with a call to stand down. The street erupted in ice. It came low and fast along the cratered asphalt, a spreading white wave that should have, by every reasonable measure of physics that governed the world Doom had just been ripped out of, locked his boots to the ground and climbed his legs to the knee before he so much as registered the temperature change. Shoto Todoroki had been 3 streets over on a night patrol shadow shift with his agency mentor when the alert came through, had covered the distance in under 90 seconds, and had made, in that 90 seconds, the calculated decision that immobilization first and questions after was the only responsible option against an unknown quirk that had just no-souled Wash's air compression like it was a light breeze. The ice reached Doom's boots and stopped, not shattered, not melted by some hidden fire aura, no dramatic hiss of steam, nothing so theatrical. It simply reached the edge of his sabatons and declined to proceed, the way water might refuse to climb a slope steeper than its own patience, pooling and thickening uselessly around him in a widening white collar that left the man himself entirely, coldly, untouched. Shoto, 16 years old, skidded to a stop at the edge of his own ice field and stared. He had frozen All for One's lieutenants. He had frozen villains with mutation-type quirks that gave them armored hides 3 times human toughness. He understood, with the clean, clinical part of his mind, that Endeavor's training had built brick by brick since childhood, that ice which failed to grip a target this completely was not failing because the target was merely strong. It was failing because whatever this was not a quirk at all. Doom turned to face him, the first true attention he had given any combatant since arriving, head tilting with something that was almost, in the coldest possible reading, curiosity. "Interesting," he said. "Ice and flame beneath it, though you do not use the flame. A divided inheritance, and a boy still deciding which half of himself he intends to hate." He said it the way one might note a footnote in someone else's biography, utterly without malice and entirely without warmth. Doom does not have time for a child's unresolved grievances against his bloodline. Withdraw or be withdrawn. "I'm not withdrawing," Shoto said, and meant it. Ice already climbing again in a second wave, wider, harder. Drawing on cold he rarely let himself use in full, and this time when it reached him, Doom did not simply stand and let it fail. He lifted one gauntlet, palm out, and the pale green light at his wrist bloomed into a hard, visible barrier, a hexagonal lattice of light that hummed audibly and threw the ice backward in a shattering spray of frost. "Do you understand?" Doom said, voice flat with something that might, in a lesser man, have been the beginning of boredom, that Doom has stood in rooms with beings who reshape stars. That the sorcerers of your own Earth's Himalayas once required 6 days, and the combined will of their order merely to contain him, and failed even then to break him? You throw ice. A beat. It is almost admirable, the persistence of small things. By the time Endeavor arrived, flame trailing behind him in a column that turned the wet street to steam for half a block, the full authority of the #1 hero descending in a controlled drop that cratered the pavement on purpose, a statement as much as an entrance. The fight had gone on 4 minutes, and not one attack, from Wash's compressed air to Shoto's escalating ice, had so much as scratched the green armor. Endeavor took one look at the scene, his son on one knee, breathing hard, ice steaming into vapor at the edges, a mid-tier pro slumped against a lamppost, a stranger in medieval-cut armor, standing utterly unmarked in the center of a crater he'd made himself, and did not waste time with introductions. He came in with fire hot enough to soften steel. Doom's barrier caught the first blast and held, hexagonal light flaring brighter, and for the first time since he'd fallen out of the sky, something in his posture shifted, not to fear, nothing so simple, but to genuine assessment, the recalibration of a man who had, for 4 minutes, been mildly inconvenienced, and was now facing something that required him to actually think. "Hellflame," Doom said, almost to himself, reading the heat signature the way another man might read a resume. Cellular combustion, self-sustaining, considerable output. He raised both gauntlets this time. Doom is intrigued. Doom is rarely intrigued. The second blast came harder, and the barrier cracked. Hairline, but visible. A spiderweb of strain across the green light. And in the space of that crack, in the half-second before either combatant could commit to what came next, 3 more figures dropped into the intersection from a hero transport that had just screamed to a halt 2 blocks back. A tall man with tired red eyes, and a scarf already unwinding from his shoulders, hair beginning to lift, though there was no wind to lift it, and Ren Kobayashi, still flat against his mailbox 20 meters away, watched Eraserhead's eyes flare red-orange as he fixed his gaze on the stranger in green. Every hero in that intersection had seen Aizawa's quirk end a fight in under 2 seconds more times than any of them could count. Erasure did not miss. It had brought down villains twice Doom's mass, Quirks with regeneration and mutation and elemental mastery all folded flat the instant those red eyes locked on and looked. Aizawa looked at Doom, and nothing happened. Not a flicker, not a stutter in the hexagonal barrier, not a hitch in the green hum still radiating from Doom's gauntlets, not so much as a change in the tilt of that iron mask. Doom's power did not so much as register the attempt, the way a stone does not register a man asking it politely to stop being a stone. Aizawa's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the world's most reliable quirk-canceling hero felt the particular, specific dread of a tool that had simply failed to find anything to grip. "That's not possible," he said quietly, mostly to himself, hair falling back down as the useless activation guttered out on its own. "There's no quirk there. There's nothing there for me to erase." Doom, hearing this, went very still, and then, slowly, terribly, began to laugh, a low metallic sound from behind the mask that held no humor in it at all, only the cold satisfaction of a man discovering, at last, a fact about a new world that he intended to use. "No," Doom said, "there is not. And that, little heroes," he lowered his still cracked barrier, straightened to his full height in the ruin of the crosswalk, cloak settling around him like a king, reclaiming a throne mid-collapse, "is the first mistake this world will make about Victor Von Doom. It will not be the last." Behind him, the rift he had torn scarred the air one final time, a thin seam of light flickering at the edge of visibility, before it guttered dark entirely, sealed, for now, and leaving him, whether he had chosen it or not, exactly where he stood. They did not take him. That was the fact that would dominate every incident report filed in the 72 hours that followed. The fact that made commission officials pale in briefing rooms 3 prefectures away. Dr. Victor Von Doom was not captured, was not subdued, was not brought in under Article 7 containment protocol, the way an unregistered quirk user of unknown threat level was supposed to be. He simply stopped fighting when he judged the fighting had told him what he needed to know, and permitted himself to be escorted, and made sure everyone present understood the distinction. "You will take me," he said, "to Endeavor," in the ringing quiet after Aizawa's erasure had failed, and the last of the ice had steamed off the cratered street. "To whoever governs this territory. Not a barracks, not a cage, a seat of authority, or Doom will consider this conversation concluded and resume his work unsupervised." He said unsupervised the way another man might say without witnesses, and the flat threat under the words landed on every hero in that intersection with equal weight. Endeavor, to his credit, and he would think about this decision for months afterward, turn it over at 3 a.m., the way he turned over every decision that might have gone the other way and cost lives, did not order the strike that his every professional instinct screamed for. He had seen the barrier crack under his second blast. He had felt, in the half-second before Aizawa arrived, the specific vertigo of an opponent who was still, even then, only beginning to try. "Agency HQ," Endeavor said instead, flame banking down to a controlled simmer along his collar. "You walk in front. Anyone follows behind you gets to decide how the next hour goes." Doom did not smile. The mask made it impossible to know if he even could. But something in the set of his shoulders suggested he had expected exactly this answer, and found it acceptably competent. The room they put him in was not a cell. Aizawa had insisted on that point specifically, over the loud objections of 2 commission liaisons who arrived by helicopter within the hour smelling of coffee and barely restrained panic, because Aizawa had watched Erasure, the one tool that had never in his career simply failed to find purchase, slide off this man like water off stone, and a homeroom teacher's particular, unglamorous genius was knowing exactly what that meant before anyone with a title above his got around to admitting it out loud. If it's not a quirk, a cell built for quirks won't hold it, and a man who thinks he's already conquered gods doesn't respond to cages. He responds to being taken seriously. So it was a conference room, 30 stories up in Endeavor's agency tower, all glass and steel, and the kind of expensive minimalist furniture that made Ren Kobayashi's mother's apartment look like a different century. And Doom sat in a chair built for men, considerably less broad than his armored frame, and looked entirely, infuriatingly at home in it. "Explain your world to me," he said, before anyone else had taken a seat. Concisely. Doom does not require flattery or hedging, and has no patience for either. It was Aizawa who answered, because Aizawa had spent 19 years teaching teenagers to think under pressure, and had long since stopped being impressed by anyone's posture, however regal. He laid it out in flat, economical sentences: quirks, the licensing system, the hero rankings, the rod of villainy that grew in whatever gaps the system left uncovered. And Doom listened with his head tilted at that same precise, cataloging angle he'd used on Shoto's ice, taking in a civilization's entire social architecture, the way another man might skim a menu. A society, Doom said, when Aizawa finished, built entirely around an accident of biology, ranked by a popularity contest, dressed as merit, policed by children in costumes granted authority by television ratings. He said it without heat, which somehow made it land harder than contempt would have. Doom has ruled a nation of ordinary men. No quirks, no powers, nothing but the will he gave them, with more genuine order than this arrangement produces on its best day. And yet you call this civilization advanced. "You've been here 4 hours," said one of the commission liaisons, a thin, nervous man named Tsurugi who had clearly not slept. "And you're already—" "Doom has ruled Latveria for decades," Doom said, without raising his voice, and something in the flatness of it made Tsurugi actually stop talking. "Doom does not require 4 hours to recognize a system built on the same fundamental error every failed system shares. That power without singular, accountable authority produces anything but chaos with better public relations." He turned his masked face fully toward Aizawa now, and for the first time since the crater, his tone shifted, not warmer, never that, but genuinely, precisely curious. "You, the one whose gift failed against me, you knew it would fail before you tried it." Aizawa didn't blink. "I suspected." "Why?" "Because you didn't fight like something that was worried about losing its power." Aizawa's red eyes had long since faded back to their tired, ordinary black, and he looked, in that moment, less like a hero, and more like a man doing the job he'd been doing for 2 decades, reading a threat correctly, and not flinching from what the reading told him. Quirk users flinch when Erasure activates. Even the ones who don't understand what's happening feel something go missing. You didn't feel anything go missing, because there was nothing of mine to take from you in the first place. Doom was silent for a long moment. Outside the glass wall, Musutafu's skyline glittered on into a night that had, 4 hours ago, been ordinary, and would never entirely be ordinary again for the people who'd been on that street. "You are the first mind in this world," Doom said finally, "that Doom has found worth engaging directly. The rest have thrown fire and ice, and the presumption of authority at me, and called it strategy." A pause. "You, at least, thought first." It wasn't a compliment. Aizawa understood that immediately. It was closer to a man filing away a useful tool for later reference. But he also understood, with the same flat clarity that had let him survive 19 years of increasingly dangerous work-study placements, that this was the first genuinely true thing Doom had said since arriving, and true things from a man like this were worth more than any amount of posturing. "What do you actually want?" Aizawa said. "Not what are your demands, not the commission-approved script sitting untouched in the folder in front of Tsurugi, just the question underneath everything Doom had done since the rift closed." And here, for the first time, Doom's certainty cracked, just slightly, just enough that Aizawa, watching for exactly this kind of tell, the way he watched for tells in every student who'd ever lied to his face about being fine, caught it. "Doom wants to go home," he said, quietly, the word home sitting strange and heavy in that cold, formal voice, like a foreign coin he wasn't used to the weight of. Doom was attempting a passage between realities, in pursuit of a debt owed to someone Doom has spent 30 years failing to save. The working held, the calculations were flawless, and it deposited Doom in a world that does not exist in any cosmology Doom has ever mapped, with no anchor point back to his own. He straightened, and the crack in his composure sealed itself shut again, iron over whatever had briefly shone through. "This is, Doom assures you, a temporary arrangement. Doom does not remain where Doom is not sovereign for longer than strictly necessary." "And in the meantime?" Aizawa asked. "In the meantime," Doom said, "Doom requires resources, your finest technicians, your most complete records of dimensional theory should any exist, and access to whatever passes in this world for genuine, unregulated scientific inquiry. rather than whatever bureaucratic theater your commission intends to waste Doom's time with. He looked, very deliberately, at Tsurugi when he said this, and Tsurugi did not manage to hide his flinch. In exchange, Doom is prepared to offer cooperation. Within limits, Doom alone will define. It was Endeavor, silent until now at the head of the table with his arms crossed and flame banked low along his collar, who finally spoke. And if we say no, if we decide a man who can shrug off a rank 1 hero's strongest hit and laugh off Erasure doesn't get to set his own terms in our city. Doom turned to face him, and something in his posture shifted again, not to the cold cataloging look he'd given Aizawa, but to something older, harder, the specific stillness of a monarch being tested by a subject who did not yet understand the shape of the mistake he was making. Then Doom will find his own path home without your assistance, he said, and this city will discover, in the process, precisely how much collateral damage separates cooperation from inconvenience. Doom has broken empires that made the same calculation you are making now, hero. Doom does not make threats. Doom makes observations about outcomes. The temperature in the room did not change. No quirk flared, no barrier hummed to life. And yet every person at that table felt, with total clarity, that they had just been shown, calmly, without a single raised gauntlet, exactly how thin the floor was beneath the word cooperation. Aizawa broke the silence before Endeavor's flame could climb any higher. "We'll get you your access," he said, supervised. "And in return, you tell us the truth about what you are, so we're not managing a threat we don't understand." Doom considered this. Considered Aizawa specifically, the tired, unglamorous, entirely unafraid teacher who had, in one afternoon, become the only person in the building Doom had bothered to actually look at twice. "Doom is a sorcerer," he said, "trained by the mystic orders of a mountain range in Doom's own world, that makes your strongest quirk user's power look like a child's parlor trick. Doom is also, separately, an engineer whose genius has been measured against, and found equal to, or superior to, the finest minds your Earth has never had the fortune to produce. Doom's power is not granted by biology, it is earned, through discipline, and your ranking system has no framework to measure. Your erasure cancels quirks." A pause, precise, almost pedagogical. "Doom is not a quirk. Doom is not measured by rules, a lesser world invented to explain an accident of genetics. Remember that distinction, hero. It will matter more than you currently understand." 3 floors below, in a service corridor that smelled of ozone and burnt asphalt tracked in on a dozen hero boots, a figure in a plain gray hoodie stood very still against a maintenance door, hands in his pockets. Listening to a voice relay feed a stolen agency comms chip was quietly bleeding into an earpiece he'd had built for exactly this kind of night. Tomura Shigaraki had come to Musutafu for an entirely different reason. A supply run gone sideways, a Nomu transport delayed by heavier than expected patrol density, and had ended up, instead, crouched on a rooftop 2 blocks from a crater in the street, watching a man in green iron no-cell, a #1 hero's strongest attack, and shrug off Erasure like it was nothing at all. He listened to the recording loop twice, the crack of the barrier, the metallic, contemptuous laugh. "No, there is not. And that, little heroes, is the first mistake this world will make." Shigaraki's fingers, resting loose at his sides, twitched. An old habit, decay itching under his skin, whenever something interesting crossed his path, and he hadn't yet decided whether to destroy it or use it. "Huh," he said, to no one, to the empty stairwell, a small, broken smile finding its way onto a face that rarely bothered with expressions at all. "Something Sensei's power can't touch." He turned the thought over. All for one, locked in Tartarus, still, even from behind bars, even stripped of most of his stockpile, the single greatest quirk-collecting force this world had ever produced. And here was a man who had, by every account already spreading through 3 separate hero band frequencies, simply not been a quirk at all. Nothing to steal, nothing to add to the collection. A blank space in the one system that had always, eventually, found a way to make everything its own. That should have been meaningless to him. A curiosity, a footnote. Instead, for reasons Shigaraki didn't examine too closely, because examining his own reasons too closely had never once led anywhere he liked, he found himself thinking, with the specific patient hunger of a man who collected grudges the way other people collected friends. A king with no crown he can lose. A man the whole system can't touch. Sensei should hear about this. He pulled his hood up and melted back into the dark of the stairwell, already composing, in his head, exactly how he intended to make first contact. 3 days passed, and Victor Von Doom did not so much adapt to the world he'd fallen into as begin, methodically, to rearrange it around himself. He was given, under supervision, under 3 separate layers of commission clearance that Tsurugi had fought for and lost in record time, access to a research annex on the 61st floor of Endeavor's agency tower, a room stocked with the finest dimensional theory this world's scientists had ever produced. And Doom had read through the entire collected body of it in 11 hours, and pronounced it, without malice, the promising groping of children who have not yet been permitted to see the shape of the door they are trying to open. He said this to the room's assigned lead researcher, a soft-spoken quirk scientist named Dr. Hatano, who had spent 6 years building her reputation on exactly the theories Doom had just dismissed in a single sentence. And then, because contempt in Doom was never simply cruelty, always also appetite, he spent the following 2 hours correcting her mathematics, with a patience that startled everyone in the room, including, visibly, himself. "You are not without capacity," he told her, at the end of it, in the tone of a man awarding a medal he clearly considered undersized for the achievement. "You simply lack the vocabulary this world has never developed. Doom will provide it, slowly, as payment requires." It was the closest thing to warmth anyone had yet seen from him, and Hatano, shaking, exhausted, quietly thrilled in the specific way of a scientist handed a key to a door she'd spent her career hammering at, would later tell Aizawa, in the debrief nobody else attended, that she thought it was the only genuine thing Doom had said all week that wasn't also, somehow, a threat. Aizawa did not find that reassuring. He found it, if anything, more useful. A man who could still be moved by competence, rather than only by power, was a man who could, eventually, be reasoned with, and reasoning was the only lever Aizawa had ever trusted more than force. He said as much to Endeavor, in the agency's top-floor office, 2 days into an arrangement that neither of them was fully comfortable calling a partnership. "He's not going to stay contained," Endeavor said, arms crossed, watching the city glitter below through the floor-to-ceiling glass. "A man like that doesn't sit in a research annex forever, just because we ask nicely." "No," Aizawa agreed. "But right now he wants something from us more than he wants to fight us. That's a smaller window than it sounds, and it's closing every day. His research doesn't move fast enough for him. We use it while it's open. And when it closes?" Aizawa didn't answer right away. He was thinking, though he didn't say it out loud, about the look on Doom's face, mask notwithstanding, somehow still legible in the tilt of it, when he'd said the word home. About a man who had crossed realities chasing a debt he'd spent 30 years failing to pay, and what a man like that might do, in a world with no stake in his outcome, once he decided patience had stopped serving him. "Then we find out exactly how much of what he told us was true," Aizawa said finally, "and I don't think we're going to like the answer." The League of Villains found their opening on the 4th night, and they found it not through force, but through the single method that had worked on every powerful, isolated, aggrieved figure Tamura Shigaraki had ever successfully recruited. They simply asked the question no one else in this world had thought, or dared, to ask. It happened in the one place Doom's supervision detail had judged, wrongly, to be safe, the roof access corridor of the agency tower, 61 floors up, at 2 in the morning, where Doom had taken to walking alone in the hours his handlers assumed he spent sleeping, because kings, he had informed Hatano dryly the one time she'd asked, do not require as much rest as the men who serve them believe. Shigaraki did not announce himself with an attack. He'd learned that lesson a long time ago, from Sensei, in 100 small patient conversations about the difference between men who could be broken and men who had to be offered something instead, and one look at the footage from the crater 4 nights ago had told him, with total clarity, which category this new arrival belonged to. He simply stepped out of the stairwell shadow at the corridor's far end, hands loose in his hoodie pockets, and said, in a voice pitched just loud enough to carry, "You know they're never going to let you go home, right?" Doom turned. Did not reach for his gauntlets, did not raise the hexagonal barrier that had cracked 3 heroes' best efforts 4 nights ago, simply turned, unhurried, and regarded the pale, hollow-eyed young man standing at the far end of the corridor, with the same cataloging tilt of the head he'd given everyone else in this world so far. "You are not agency personnel," Doom said, "nor commission. You have circumvented 6 separate security measures to stand in this corridor, which suggests either considerable skill or considerable stupidity, and Doom is inclined, for the moment, to reserve judgment on which. Tomura Shigaraki." He didn't move closer. She didn't reach for the decay that itched, constant and low, under the skin of his fingers. "League of Villains, and I'm not here to fight you, believe me. I watched the footage. I'm not an idiot. I'm here because I think you and I have a mutual problem, and I think you're smart enough to already suspect what it is." "Enlightened Doom. They need you contained," Shigaraki said, not helped. "Contained. Right now they're playing nice, because you scared them, and because you've got something they want. But the second your research stops being useful, or the second you stop being convenient, they'll find a way to make you small enough to manage. That's what this system does. It doesn't matter how strong you are, it just needs you weaker than the story it's telling about itself." He tilted his head, decay-scarred fingers finally coming loose from his pocket, though he kept them well clear of anything he might accidentally touch. "I'd know. I've spent my whole life being something this system decided needed managing. It should not have landed." Doom had spent decades being flattered, manipulated, courted by lesser men who thought a well-turned phrase might buy his cooperation, and he had broken every one of them for the insult of the attempt. But something in Shigaraki's voice, flat, uninflected, entirely without the oily performance of a man selling something, caught on an old, specific wound in Doom that 30 years of ruling an empire had never quite scarred over. "You presume to understand Doom's circumstance," he said, and there was no heat in it, which was somehow worse than if there had been. "Explain, precisely, what you believe you have to offer that this world's heroes do not." "Freedom to actually work," Shigaraki said. "No supervision, no commission liaison hovering over your shoulder deciding what research you're allowed to touch. You want to go home? Fine, I don't care about that. That's not my problem to solve. But you want resources with no leash on them, and heroes are never going to give you that. Because the second thing they want more than your cooperation is your obedience, and I don't think you're built for obedience." A beat, and something that might have been the ghost of a smile, thin and humorless, crossed his face. "I've read the reports. Eraserhead's quirk didn't touch you. Endeavor's fire cracked your shield and you laughed. You're not a hero, and you're sure as hell not built to follow one's rules. So why are you letting them decide the terms of your stay?" Doom was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Shigaraki, patient, the way Sensei had taught him patience, was the only weapon that worked on men who could not be threatened, simply waited, and did not push. "You misjudge Doom," he said finally. "If you believe flattery about Doom's unwillingness to be leashed, we'll secure his allegiance to your leash instead. Doom has read your file as thoroughly as your agency's security clearance allowed him access to it in 3 days. A boy who destroys for the sake of destruction, who wears the resentments of his youth as a mask quite literally made of severed hands, following the design of a stockpiling quirk thief, who calls himself All for One, and imagines himself Doom's equal in ambition." He took one step closer, and something in his bearing shifted, not to violence, but to the specific, total contempt of a monarch, addressing a would-be usurper, who had badly misjudged the scale of what he was attempting to usurp. "Doom has met men like your sensei before. Doom has broken men like your sensei before. The difference between Doom and the villains and heroes alike in this small provincial world is that Doom does not require an army of stolen powers, or an origin story built from grievance, to know precisely who he is. You offer Doom freedom from one leash, by inviting him to wear another, dressed in different colors. Doom declines." Shigaraki's expression didn't change, but something in the air around him did, the decay under his skin flaring, just slightly, an old reflex against being dismissed that he'd spent years learning to leash, not always successfully. "You'll change your mind," he said, quiet, almost gentle in a way that was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. "Everyone does. Eventually. Once this world shows them exactly how it treats things, it decides it can't control. When you do," he was already turning back toward the stairwell shadow he'd come from, hood rising, decay-marked fingers sliding back into his pocket. "You'll know where to find me. Sensei's been very curious about a man his power can't touch. I think you'd find the conversation worth having when the time comes." He was gone before Doom could decide whether the conversation warranted a response at all, vanished back down the stairwell as silently as he'd arrived, leaving Doom alone on the 61st floor with a city glittering below him that was not his city, in a night that would not end in a home that was not his home, and a single unwelcome thought settling into the cold, precise architecture of his mind. The boy was not entirely wrong. He did not mention the encounter to Aizawa, or to Hatano, or to anyone wearing the tower's agency credentials. He filed it, instead, the way he filed everything, a data point, weighed and catalogued, to be deployed at whatever moment its deployment served him best. But 4 floors down in the tower's security office, a junior technician running routine footage review on the roof corridor's blind spot camera, installed 18 months ago after an unrelated incident, forgotten by nearly everyone who might have thought to warn Doom's detail it existed, froze the frame on a hooded figure with pale hair and scarred hands, and picked up the phone to call Aizawa directly. "Sir," she said, when he answered, groggy, at 2:30 in the morning, "I think you need to see this. I think Shigaraki just made contact with our guest. And I think," she hesitated, replaying the muted footage one more time, watching Doom's stillness, watching the exact, unreadable tilt of his masked head as the boy walked away. "I think he's actually thinking about it." Aizawa was already reaching for his jacket before she finished the sentence. Aizawa found him on the 61st floor an hour before dawn, and did not bother with pretense. "You had a visitor last night," he said, dropping the tablet with the corridor footage onto the table between them, the frozen image of Shigaraki's hooded silhouette, lit pale by the emergency lighting. Roof access corridor. 2:14 in the morning. Doom did not look at the tablet. He was seated at the research annex's central console, 3 of Hatano's monitors arrayed around him, green calculations scrolling faster than any human researcher in the room could follow, and he did not so much as glance up from the work. "Doom is aware of who visited him," he said. "Doom did not consider it relevant to your commission's oversight. It's relevant when the League of Villains makes personal contact with a man who's already proven he can shrug off our best hero's strongest hit," Aizawa said. "I need to know what he offered you, and I need to know what you told him. He offered Doom the same thing every desperate, ambitious child offers a king he does not understand," Doom said, finally turning from the console, the green light of half-finished equations still reflecting faint across his mask. "A throne built from someone else's foundation, dressed as liberation. Doom has ruled long enough to recognize the shape of that offer, from 100 lesser courts, across 100 failed alliances. It was declined. A pause, precise, deliberate. You may report that to your commission as fact, teacher, because it is fact, and Doom does not lie about matters this small. And the part where you didn't mention it," Aizawa said, "until I brought the footage to you myself." Something in Doom's posture shifted, not guilt. Aizawa understood immediately, because a man like this did not experience guilt the way ordinary men did, but something closer to genuine, cold recalibration, an acknowledgement that a small miscalculation had been made, filed away for correction. "Doom does not report to you," he said. "Doom tolerates you, because your cooperation has thus far served Doom's return home more efficiently than your commission's alternative, which, Doom has no illusions, was containment dressed as hospitality from the first hour Doom arrived in your world." He rose from the console chair, and even seated in an undersized chair meant for smaller frames, he had made it look, for 4 days, like a throne. Standing now, at his full height, the effect was total. "Doom will tell you this once, and you would be wise not to require the lesson twice. Doom answers no one's oversight. Doom has permitted the appearance of cooperation because it has, until this moment, cost Doom nothing he valued. If your commission intends to escalate its restrictions in response to a conversation Doom did not initiate and firmly declined, Doom will reconsider precisely how much value your cooperation retains." It was, Aizawa understood, reading the room the way he'd read 1,000 rooms full of teenagers testing exactly how far a boundary could bend before it broke. Both a genuine warning and, underneath it, something else. A man who had just been offered an escape from a leash he resented, and had said no, and was furious, in the particular controlled way of men like this, that the offer had been tempting at all. He didn't get the chance to press further. The alarm hit every floor of the tower at once. A low, escalating klaxon that agency staff trained on since their first week, recognized immediately as breach, not fire, not evacuation drill, something considerably worse. And through the annex's floor-to-ceiling window, Aizawa watched a seam of violet-black distortion tear open 3 floors below on the building's exterior face, wrong-angled and swirling in a way that had nothing to do with any weather this city had ever produced. Kurogiri's warp gate, fully deployed, fully aggressive, opening not into the tower's controlled airspace but through its outer wall, glass and steel folding inward around the edges of it like paper caught in a furnace. "They're not here to talk," Aizawa said, already moving, capture weapon unwinding from his shoulders. Doom, behind him, did not move toward the exit. He turned back, instead, to the console, to the calculations still scrolling green across 3 monitors. 11 days of theoretical work compressed by his genius into 4, a working now perhaps 6 hours from completion by his own private estimate. And something in his stillness told Aizawa, with total clarity, exactly what Doom had decided to prioritize in the chaos about to erupt. "They intend to seize your research," Aizawa said. It wasn't a question. "They intend," Doom said, gauntlets already lighting with pale green light, "to seize Doom, and discover, as your heroes did 4 nights ago, precisely how poor an investment that intention represents." A beat. Though Doom notes, with some interest, that the timing is inconvenient for you specifically, teacher. Doom's calculations near completion. If the boy and his league disrupt this room before the working stabilizes, the cost falls on your world, not Doom's. The battle that followed would be reconstructed, later, from 41 separate pieces of security footage, hero body cam recordings, and the traumatized testimony of 11 commission staff who had been pulled from bed at 4 in the morning and were still, months later, describing it to therapists as the night the building itself seemed to be arguing with reality. Shigaraki came through first, hood down now, decay-marked hand already reaching for the nearest support column with the casual, terrible intimacy of a man who had turned entire buildings to gray dust before breakfast, and stopped, halfway to the wall, when Doom's voice cut across the annex, flat and cold, and entirely unhurried by the violet chaos of Kurogiri's gate, still tearing wider behind him. "You return," Doom said, having failed to secure Doom's cooperation through words, to attempt it through force. Doom finds this considerably less imaginative than he expected, given your sensei's reputation. "Sensei doesn't want your cooperation anymore," Shigaraki said, and something in his voice had changed since the corridor. Colder now, more clipped. A boy delivering a message rather than making an offer. He wants a conversation, in person. He says he's been very interested in a man his power can't reach, and he says, and I'm quoting this exactly because he made me memorize it, that a king who spent 30 years failing to save one soul from a devil might find he has more in common with a man who spent decades collecting power to escape a different kind of hell than he'd like to admit. Doom went very still. Aizawa, mid-motion, capture weapon already lashing toward Shigaraki's exposed wrist, caught the stillness out of the corner of his eye and understood, with the specific dread of a man watching a carefully built structure show its first real crack, that Shigaraki's message had landed somewhere Doom hadn't expected to be touched at all. "He knows about your mother," Shigaraki said, quieter now, almost gentle, the way he'd been gentle in the corridor. "Don't ask me how. Sensei knows things. He's very old, and he spent longer than you'd believe learning about power that isn't quirks. Old power, the kind your mystics taught you, the kind that doesn't come from biology at all. He thinks he might know something about the thing you're chasing, the debt, the devil. He says he's willing to trade it, for a conversation. Just a conversation, King, that's all he's asking. For 3 full seconds, an eternity. In the collapsing physics of a battle already underway around them, Kurogiri's gate widening, Endeavor's flame column erupting through the annex's shattered outer wall as he arrived in answer to the alarm, ice already spreading across the floor as Shoto came through behind his father. Doom did not move at all. Then his gauntlets, which had been rising toward Shigaraki in clear preparation for the same contemptuous, effortless dismissal he'd shown the boy in the corridor, lowered, fractionally, and something in the flat, cold voice cracked open just wide enough for Aizawa to hear what was underneath it. "You lie," Doom said. But it did not sound certain. It sounded, for the first time since the crater 4 nights ago, like a man asking a question he was afraid to hear the answer to. "Maybe," Shigaraki said. "Ask him yourself." And then, before anyone in the annex could close the distance, he pressed his palm flat against the console table's edge. Decay spreading instant and total, the entire structure crumbling to gray dust in a wave that took 3 of Hatano's monitors, and, with them, 6 hours of calculation that had been, by Doom's own estimate, the closest path home this world had yet offered him. The 11 days of work, gone in under 2 seconds. Doom's scream of fury was not a word. It was a sound Aizawa had never heard a person make, metallic and raw even through the mask, and the hexagonal barrier that erupted from his gauntlets a half-second later was not defensive at all. It was retaliation, pure and total, a wave of force that took Shigaraki off his feet and sent him crashing back through Kurogiri's still-open gate before the villain could so much as brace. But the gate, destabilized by the force of Doom's strike hitting it at the wrong angle mid-collapse, did not simply close behind him. It widened. Violet-black distortion bloomed across the annex's shattered wall. No longer a controlled warp, but something reacting. Unstable, feeding on the raw dimensional energy still bleeding from Doom's half-destroyed calculations. And through it, for one impossible half-second, every person in that room saw something that was not Musutafu's skyline, not any part of the world they knew. A sky the wrong color, a skyline of towers built from black stone and old iron, banners hanging limp in windless air, and at the center of it, faint, flickering, gone almost before anyone could be certain they'd seen it at all, a castle. Doom went rigid. "Latveria," he said, and the word came out of him raw, stripped of every ounce of the cold formality he'd worn like armor since the moment he'd fallen out of the sky 4 nights ago. He took 1 step toward the widening gate, gauntlet already reaching, green light blazing along his arm bright enough to throw hard shadows across the annex's ruined walls. That is Latveria. That is home. Doom don't. Aizawa's voice, sharp, cutting through the chaos, because whatever was happening in that gate, whatever raw, unstable energy was tearing through a hole, never meant to open this wide. Every instinct 19 years of teaching reckless teenagers had ever given him screamed that walking into it now, uncontrolled, unstabilized, was not a door home. It was a wound in reality that had no idea what it was about to do to the man who stepped through it. Doom did not stop. His hand closed on the edge of the gate, violet-black energy licking up his gauntlet, the image of the castle flickering wilder, closer, the banners on its towers snapping now in a wind that should not have existed on either side of the threshold. And the last thing Aizawa saw clearly, before the entire annex went white with light and the gate screamed shut with a sound like the sky itself tearing, was Victor von Doom's masked face turned fully toward that flickering castle, one word leaving him that was not cold, not formal, not the voice of a king at all. And then the light took everything, and the annex fell silent, and where Dr. Doom had been standing a half-second before, there was only scorched floor, and drifting ash where Hatano's monitors had been, and a hole in reality sealing itself shut on a question no one in that room would be able to answer, whether the man who had just stepped through it had gone home at all, or whether something else, from somewhere else, had simply borrowed his shape long enough to walk through the door he'd opened.